Virgil, and we're back for another lesson in basic mixing techniques. This is lesson 2 in our series, and we've come to the end of lesson 1, and we've got all these submixes done. We've got a master fader created. We soft soloed everything, and we put a limiter on our master fader. So we're kind of ready to start the whole mixing process from the bottom up, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But before we do anything else, we want to look at a couple ways that we can look at our mix. In Pro Tools, we can, with Pro Tools selected, we can command equal, and we can switch between windows. Now, in this case, sometimes when you get a mix in, you're going to notice the levels being a little, not hot enough. These are plenty hot. In fact, those guys, that's a little hot there. Looks like somebody has done something called clip gaining, and we'll get into that later. But I'm going to bring that down to 0-ish, around in there. So just grab and drag it. But it looks like everything's been really well handled as far as I think we've got more than enough level to, in other words, the height of these waves seems to be okay. Now, one little thing as far as, being able to see what you're doing in Pro Tools. You can do this in other DAWs, of course, but you have in Pro Tools this little button right here, which is the audio zoom out, which kind of gives me the ability to, if I move it up, it's going to zoom in. If I move it down, it's going to zoom out. So that's really small. Going down, going back up, it's going to kind of explode. Now, it's not making anything really any louder, but what it is doing is it's kind of showing us, what's there. And sometimes if I'm looking for things before the mix, if I hear a noise or something weird going on, between the hit of a drum and the hit of another drum, it's like, okay, I want to see, where is that noise coming from, The other thing is that I really like about Pro Tools is this feature here. So the same area of control here. And if you mouse over that, it says horizontal zoom in. So if I want to zoom in to a track, look. So I'm like stretching it out horizontally, left to right. And I can kind of see what things look like here and zooming it back like that. Third thing you might be not aware of yet, but is that Pro Tools has these little guys, and these are zoom memory locators. So what you can do, wow, that went out really far. You can zoom in one that they come as presets of certain widths from left to right of the zoom into the track. So 1, 2, and it gets further out 3, and you can actually do individual. You can set up your own if you'd like to. If you come to I want number 4, I'm going to grab my zoom tool here. I'm going to zoom it in like that, and I can say, okay, number 4. I'm going to zoom everything in where I want it. That's where I want it, and I'm going to click and hold number 4, and you can actually see. You can save the zoom preset, and so now there's number 3. Okay, here's number 4. Boom. See, so you save the zoom preset for yourself for later. That's a really neat Pro Tools thing to do. But anyway, I wanted to check on these files and make sure they're plenty loud enough, and they look like I'm not going to have to worry too much about a lot of things with this mix as far as the levels are concerned. There are some other issues I'm seeing here that I'm going to have to address down the road as we start editing a little deeper. But again, we're trying to make things quick and clean, and so that's where we're going to start now. So I'm gonna close the door on that one and go into back to the mix window. I'm going to solo out my drums, and I'm going to hear those drums for just a second. So let's hear what we're dealing with. Okay, so I'm kind of seeing what I've got coming up here, and listening to a lot of the drums. They're really ringy, they're really open sounding. If I listen to the whole track, I'm going to take a quick listen. So I'm going to undo the solo real quick, and understand I've heard this track a number of times. So one of the first things that you want to do before you start really digging into your mix is give your track a good couple of listens. But I'm very aware of what I'm dealing with. So, but you haven't heard this, so the guitars were recorded clean, and we'll get into that, how we're going to process those later. But they kind of did that on purpose so that they can hand the mix totally into production, the sound of everything over to me totally, without having gone through an amplifier. The guitar's actually direct. So let's listen to this real quick. It's going to sound a little cheesy. Okay, so you see what we're dealing with. Okay, so let's solo things out real quick here. So in the interest of time, we're going to isolate some elements of the mix. We're going to, again, start with just the drums. I'm going to do a bottom-up kind of mix. That's where we start with the kick and the bass. So I want to hear what my kick drum sounds like. So I'm going to do this right now. So I'm going to mute out all those other tracks. I want to hear my kick by itself. Let's hear it. Okay, so you could hear immediately there that there's some bleed over from the other instruments, and that doesn't really scare me as much. Now, some people, when they do mix downs, prefer to have every instrument absolutely totally clean, devoid of any crosstalk. In other words, these are real drums with mics on them, recorded by a drummer that's living and breathing. This is not an automated drum track, and these are not Slate plugins. Although I love all that stuff, but this is as real and raw as it gets. So there's a lot of crosstalk. In other words, you can hear the cymbals in the kick drum. You can hear the snares and the toms and the kick drum. So it kind of, there's getting a little bit of what they call crosstalk or bleed from other microphone, other sources of sound into the kick drum mic. So you probably noticed that the kick drum does have a specific tone to it. Let's listen to it up against the bass. And this is what I mean by, and I'm going to shift click on the solos for the drum mix and the bass. And let's hear what the bass guitar tone sounds like up against the kick drum. Here we go. Okay, so the bass player is kind of playing fast and loose with whether he wants to follow the kick or not. And that's okay. That's music. But more than one occurrence, the bass guitar is actually syncing up or playing along with the kick. So we want to be aware of that as we mix down. So I'm going to step away from the bass for a second, and I'm going to concentrate on the kick. Now there are several ways you can do this, and I would highly suggest looking at a lot of different ways of approaching doing kick processing and such. But I'm going to start with just treating all the instruments that are in the drum set that have a head. In other words, they have a thin plastic membrane head on them. So the kick has a head. In other words, that piece of plastic part of that you hit that vibrates. The snare, same way. There is a head on the snare. If there was no head on the snare, it would not make a sound. If it did, it wouldn't sound like a snare drum. Toms all have drum heads on them. They have thin plastic membranes stretched across a wooden shell, and you hit it with a stick, and it makes a sound. So what I'm going to do to those skins is I'm going to do something that's called parallel compression. Now, parallel compression is also known as the New York trick, or not. Some people call it New York style mixing, because New Yorkers have this reputation. No offense to my friends in New York, I have a lot of you out there, but they have this that they're aggressive and they're in your face, and it's like, well, okay, that's fine. So let's do what's called a parallel compression on this. So we're going to start here. So kick, snare, 3 toms. They've all got heads. None of the cymbals have. Up to you how you want to do this, but basically how I do is, again, I'm going to select all the nameplates of all those. In Pro Tools, I'm going to do what's called an Alt, Shift, and click, and this time it's going to be on Ascend. I'm going to create a new track. I'm going to call it Drum Comp. So it's going out stereo, aux input, and it's going to be DRM CMP, a drum compressor. So I'm going to create that. Boom. And this is kind of interesting here. So you get this compressor that is tied to a send on the drum. So the drum mix is going out to the master fader, but we're going to send a copy of it on a send bus to the compressor for the drums. Okay? Are you with me so far? All right. So, but there's nothing in this right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to throw in a compressor. Now you can choose the one that you like. I'm just going to start off with the BF76, which is a mock-up of an 1176 drum compressor. It's a standard garden variety, been in the industry forever compressor. Okay, I'm going to leave all these settings alone except for right now the attack. I'm going to tighten it up. I'm going to make it real short. So the fastest attack, this is for a drum, okay, sound. So I'm going to make that attack very quick, and then the release on an 1176, if you crank it to the right, it's actually speeding up the release. Now let's look at this. The next thing I want to make sure of, I'm going to move my compressor out of the way. I'm going to put it down here by my drums, and I'm also going to make it red because it's part of the drum collective. And I'm also, since I've got it here in the drum mix, I'm going to command click and soft solo it so that when I solo the drums out, I get the compressor as well in the mix. Super important. So the compressor's kind of hanging out here for a second. So I'm gonna listen to my drums, and I'm gonna watch this real quick. So I'm gonna hit play. And you notice there's nothing going on here. You're not seeing the needle move, and you're going, why is that not happening? Well, in Pro Tools, what you have to do is you have to tell it, how much do I want going out to this, okay? How much do I want to send out to the compressor? So I'm going to do real quick is up here in this thing called View. I'm going to go to my mix window views, and I'm going to choose anything that I want to see, right? And I'm seeing everything, but I'm not seeing all of it that I want to see. So here's what I'm going to do. In my views, I'm going to go to expand sends. Now these sends are already here. I can click on one and open it up and see that this slider, this send level that would be sending information out to this compressor, is down at 0, and that's why it's not going anywhere. And I can go through each one of those guys and go Alt click and set it at 0 and be happy and play it back. There we go. And you see now it's actually sending out to the compressor, right? Well, that's fine and all, but I mean, I now have to go through all of these and click them down. So in my view, I can see my sends, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand the one that has the compressor on it for now. Okay? So at that point, I can Alt-click on these guys, and that's going to raise all of them up to 0 dB, what's called unity gain. It's going to send them all out the same level to the compressor. That's right here under Drum Comp, okay? And we're going to see what that does now with this compressor. Now you're seeing a lot of compression going on in that compressor. You also notice there's a tonal difference in the instruments. Let me just isolate it down just to the snare. Okay, the snare and the kick. Let's see what that tonal change is like, and I'm going to do that by engaging the bypass, and you'll be able to hear the difference. If I hit the bypass, not nearly as much. See, it's a little more aggressive. Right? So the drum set does gain just a little bit more punch, a little bit more presence, a little more aggression in the tone, okay? So that is parallel compression, and we're going to get further deeper into the mix in our next lesson. But what we did today was we went through, we checked our levels in all of our tracks. We made sure that we had all the levels that we needed. We looked at two different ways that we could zoom in on our mix and get down to the specifics in the mix if we have to clean something up. And then we put in a parallel compressor for some New York style mixing. So we'll get into that a little deeper in lesson 3. So thank you so much, and see you next time.